We're going up and down, over and over. It's the same old thing. Up and down, over and under.
Is there anything that like you definitely do think is worth covering? Like, is there anything that you're interested in right now, or?
Not really. I mean, I think that, we'll probably get there organically. I think
Cool.
like you said, just conversationalist part, I don't really have any specific topic I'm super passionate about, but
Yeah.
I just I've always taken a real holistic approach to stuff. And I think that, people look at me because of what I do, as an athlete, but a lot of this stuff really, it translates to everybody. I mean, it's no different, I mean, we just, we do it at maybe a different level, or, people look at times and say, oh, you run this, but the process of getting there is no different than anybody just trying to set a PR in a marathon, or, a new best in a 10K. It's all the same. And I think that when you get lost and you get too far away from that process and what got you there, that's when you start getting into trouble.
Yeah. Well, dude, I mean, let's just start it then, because I feel like that's such an awesome opening, quite frankly. And I think a lot of people will probably be pleasantly surprised to hear that that's your perspective on it. If you're like, no, I'm kind of a different breed of person. You guys didn't really have a chance to begin with. That would have been a little tougher to swallow. But yeah, man, dude, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to talk to you. I mean, for a couple of reasons, man. Like, when I was looking back kind of at your track record, you've been in the 2008, 2012, 2016 Olympics. And then, I still don't know exactly where the 2020 time trials netted out. Actually, let me ask you that. Did you get to actually finish qualifying for 2020?
Yeah, so we were really lucky. The marathon trials are always before the track trials. The track and field Olympic trials are usually in the summer, like late June, July. So those have been postponed. I don't think they've set a date yet. But for the marathon, which is what I'm doing right now, we had our trials February 29th in Atlanta. And it was right before, I think we just got it in. Yeah. Because it was right before a lot of stuff started getting canceled. I mean, my coach, he coaches at Northern Arizona University, and they were, I think, getting ready for go Lumberjacks. They were they were getting ready for the NCAA indoor championships that next week, and they got canceled. So we just got it in, and so I feel super blessed that we were able to just have that race and get it in, especially looking back now with all that's happened since then. But yeah, the top 3 men and women there qualified, and our spots are set, and hopefully it all works out that the Olympics go off fine next year.
Yeah. So okay. So I probably could have looked this up then. But what did you qualify in?
So I won the marathon. So yeah, that's it. This will be different. Yeah. In 12 and 16, I did 2 events. I did the 10K and 5K in London in 2012, and then in 16 in Brazil, I ran the 10K and the marathon. So it'd be nice to just be one this time.
Okay. Yeah. Probably a little more manageable. So, I mean, the first thing that jumps out to me, there's a couple things that jump out, but it's one thing to kind of reach that level of success and to be able to hold on to that for a little while, right? It's hard enough to kind of over a 4-year cycle, maintain that level and get back, as long as the Olympics happen, you've already locked up your spot for the marathon. In your eyes, what has kind of been the key to maintaining that level of success?
I mean, I had someone ask me last year about, why I run. And I think that it's kind of applicable to this. And, I think when a lot of people get in, you get a lot of answers about, well, I want to win the Olympics, or I want to break the world record. I want to win a gold medal, whatever it is. But I think it always has to be deeper than that. And, I've been fortunate to spend a lot of time around the military and people in the military over the years. And I have the utmost respect for those men and women, and I love them to death. I mean, I just think that their whole perspective is unbelievable. And a lot of them always talk about, what's your why for being here? And especially in the, more special operations side of things, you've got to have a pretty deep rooted reason why you're doing that, because you're putting your body, in your mind through hell to get through all this. And the only way people get through there and thrive is that they have some real deep seated belief in what they're doing and why they're there. And so, for me, I think that it has to be more than, winning a medal or, getting a lot of money, whatever it is, and for me, it's always been just about like excellence is the best way I can put it. Just the pursuit of excellence in whatever you do. And I think that it can translate to all assets of your life. And I dedicate so much to my running. And when I'm not training, I want to be the best at resting. I want to be the best at lifting or stretching. Whatever task it is that I put myself into, my whole body, mind, spirit has got to be 100% bought into that and be involved in that. And so, for me with running and you ask why I want to do this stuff, it's because it's almost like a journey. It's some fun thing about see what can I get out of myself and how far can I take this, how hard can I train? And you keep every year, even when you have great years, you keep looking towards the next thing, and sometimes probably to a fault where you don't take time to enjoy those moments. But it's like you get that done and then it's like, oh man, well, once I start doing this or I start lifting harder, I can get my deadlifts up or I can run more mileage, I can get more speed work, like think of where I can take it there. And that's always been my attitude with all this stuff. And from day one when I got into the sport of track and field. So it's been fun, sometimes the years where you don't, quite reach the goals that you have, those are easier to look and say, well, I can get better in a lot of ways. But it's also fun when you have those good years and then you're able to really go back and review and take some time to reflect and find new areas for growth, because you constantly have to be growing and evolving. People that just, it's such a common mistake. I think people look at, well, I had a great year and they go back and they just try to replicate what they did. And it never works like that. Even if you do the exact same workouts, you're not living in this bubble. There's all sorts of life stresses, all this stuff that goes on and go into things, like sleep patterns, nutrition, like all this stuff matters. And so you can never just try to go back and replicate. It's always about moving forward and how can I keep getting better?
Yeah. No, and I mean, just the way that you talk about it too, it's clear that it sounds, I mean, you said as much, but it sounds like there's a constant pursuit of excellence, and it's constantly, trying to evolve, find areas where you can like eke out new gains, you know what I mean, that are going to make you a better runner. It's funny, speaking about the military, we just had a guy on by the name of Chris Walsh. He's on the USA bobsled team. And something that he said that I've thought a lot about was how you do anything is how you do everything, and it's just, I'm hearing some of the similar traits in the way that like you, sounds like, approach it. It's not just like, hey, how can I approach my running? It's sleep, it's nutrition, it's the weight room. You're looking for areas to find an advantage across like all of these different kind of like pillars that ultimately kind of like build you into the athlete that you are.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, the physical training, I think, is the thing that all gets the most play, like right away. That's what everybody wants to know about is, what mileage are you running? What workouts are you doing? What are you doing in your weight room? What your numbers are? But, those things are different and they're not all in isolation. That's one of the things that I've realized as I've gotten older is, sometimes you can never tell one thing that just makes an athlete who they are. Some people get to that, whatever that point is at the top of the mountain, a million different ways. There's so many different paths up there. Some guys will do tons of mileage and not a lot of speed work. Some guys lift a lot. Some guys think like everything I got to do is quality, but I'm not going to do as much of it. I mean, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of different ways. And you can look at one thing and say, well, maybe that can help predict it, but they don't know. I mean, your body, your mind, it's so complex, and the relationships with how all that stuff interacts. It's impossible to know. And so, like you said, I think it's important that you just keep looking. You have to, it's this constant process of going through things, then you race, you train, and you go back and you reflect. And I think that's a really important step that a lot of people don't look at is taking some time to reflect on that and go through all those different areas of your life. Like what's working, what doesn't, and you got to, go through it with a fine tooth comb and really try to weed out every little area, especially when things are going well. That's the hardest part because you say, well, things are going well, but there's always ways you can get better, and so.
The old, if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality.
I hate that saying. Yeah, I really, I hate it. And I think it gets, in my world in distance running, it gets used so much, especially when it comes to, mechanics or, a guy or girl has a great season and it's like, well, hey, they get scared, and that's really what it is. They're scared about getting hurt or changing things up when, my mindset and what I believe most people's mindset should be is, how can we keep getting better? How can we attack these deficiencies? Not,
Yeah.
well, I don't want to mess around with this because maybe they'll get hurt or maybe they won't run as well. And then what's going to happen, and they're worried about these negatives as opposed to, attacking these things and saying, and sure, sometimes it doesn't work. I've tried, for everything that I've tried over my career that has worked, there's probably been like 20 or 30 things that we tried that just have done
Right.
nothing,
Yeah.
But you keep trying, and it's when you do find those things that make a big advantage, they could be huge. And it's just one of those things, all throughout my career, my coaches have always been big on mechanics and working on stuff. And I had pretty good form, running form when I started out, but they constantly tweaking things. I've worked with lots of sprint coaches over the years, different, biomechanists and people like that. And you're trying to eke out that little bit that's going to help you. And
Right.
It's weird because these little changes can make a big thing. But it's really different, running it's one of those sports where it's so repetitive that you get into these habits of doing things a certain way, and little changes like with your arms, they feel like you're doing things so drastically because you're used to doing it. It's insane, but you got to keep working and drill it into your head.
Yeah. Oh man, that's such an interesting point. Yeah, because a lot of times we've had a couple folks on who, talk about the importance of biomechanics and like finding the most efficient path to, you know what I mean? Get to what you're trying to do. But like when you think about something like a marathon, to your point, it's like, not only can you keep that up for an entire race, it's like looking back, like you have these patterns that have been like hammered in over, what, thousands of miles? It's like, so how tough is it to make like that sort of, change to something that you're doing mechanically?
It's really tough. It takes a lot of self-awareness. Obviously you need people around you that are watching you and those reminders, like, for me, a big thing is like my shoulders always round forward, especially when I get tired and they start to come up, which I think is a pretty common thing for a lot of runners. So that's been something I'm working on for, years and years and years to try to get better. And it's still not where I want it, but you keep trying to do things and when you're running, I've heard of guys, putting, like a bell on a bracelet or something. So it's just constantly clinking around and, any little thing, that you can get to remind yourself, because you start running, you do it for a little bit, but inevitably you revert back to your old habits because that's the way your body's used to moving. Right. So to break that habit and break that cycle, you have to be so aware of what you're doing and almost, what's the right word? Like hyper do that motion, if that makes sense. Like you overdo it. Because if you just get to that one point and you're trying to hold it there, when you get tired, you're going to revert back. So you got to really exaggerate all those things. And then, when you're tired and you're trying to do it, like it's going to get to where it's supposed to be. Right.
Yeah. It's easy to do it when you're fresh thinking about it. When you're miles into a run, I imagine it gets quite a bit tougher.
Yeah.
So it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, you do a really good job of kind of objectively assessing like strengths and weaknesses. And it seems like you're willing to like dive in and try and make the adjustments that you think are actually going to make you a better runner. And I imagine probably a better person, because like you said, it's all tied in together. Is that something that you've kind of always been wired to do naturally? Is that a skill that you've kind of had to build over time? Where does that come from?
I think it's a little bit of both. I've always been a bit of a perfectionist, even when I was younger in school and stuff. And I remember my mom like telling me, stop working, you need to go to sleep. She was probably great. Like looking back, both my parents, they're awesome as far as like keeping me balanced, because I would do things and they're like, you don't need to, I don't want to say not work this hard, but just get it done and go to sleep. It's not worth staying up all night to try to do something. And so, they did that a lot, but I got good grades as a kid. I got good grades all through high school and college. And, but it's always been something, it can be a big strength or a big weakness, when you look at things have to be perfect all the time, because there's certainly, points, especially when I was younger, where if I wasn't running unbelievable, I wasn't absolutely killing everybody or breaking a record, it was almost I looked at it as like a failure to some
Oh,
extent,
wow.
even if I won. And it was a bad thing, but I think I was lucky enough that, my parents especially, and then just the people that have come through my life, they've really worked with me a lot on that, and, kind of turned it into a strength, and tried to say, well, you got to let some of this stuff go, but if you can control this and get into something, it can be a really positive thing. And so,
Yeah.
I've had people tell me I do have a fairly high capacity, to obsess over certain things, whether
Right.
it's things with my mechanics or, looking at the strengths and weaknesses. It's just, I can't turn that part of my brain off, and drives my wife nuts sometimes, when I'll start something, and even just like, just going to like sweep up the garage, and then that'll turn into me working for like 4 or 5 hours, organizing everything, doing all this. And she's like, just work for a little bit and let it go. And I have a bit of a problem doing that. But I think that it's turned into somewhat of a good thing, because I can, really go deep and look at all these things, to a very detailed level. And then, I think just also having people around that, preach good communication. And, I have a very, I won't say small circle, but there's just a few people that I really trust and talk to a lot. And it's always been that way throughout my life, but it's like a family, and sometimes those are difficult conversations to have, where you really go at it, and sometimes you hear things you really don't want to hear, or you say things to other people that, you kind of regret in the back, but, there was all love at the end of it. And, I guess it sounds kind of hokey, but, when there's that atmosphere, that's the only way you really grow with stuff, is going through having those uncomfortable, conversations sometimes, and really blunt, honest things. But at the end of the day, you all realize, like, you have the same goal, you're trying to get to the best you can be. And, when you recognize that at the end, it's, you might disagree sometimes on how you get there, but it's good to always have those, conversations, get that stuff out there.
Yeah. Well, and, thinking back too, and I would love to hear a little bit about how you kind of fell into running, or I guess maybe when you knew that like you were onto something special, but you had really high level success at what would be a really young age for most folks. And I would say even across like most sports, right? Like you were doing things at a very high level very early. And so like to hear you say, if I wasn't breaking a record or blowing everyone out of the water, it almost felt like in some ways, maybe that day was a failure or an underachievement in some respects. And so I have to imagine there could have been the opportunity for that to almost kind of be like a negative pressure that could start to have some real like negative implications, either with your kind of relationship with the sport, or just like perceived pressure that you felt to like be the superstar that you had kind of been pegged to be. I mean, was the inner circle kind of really critical in helping you navigate that? Was it, I guess, something that you actually struggled with?
I wouldn't say I struggled with it. I think it was more on a day-to-day thing. I just let stuff bother me. If I had a bad workout, a bad race, it just put me in such a horrible mood. And I took it home, I took it out on my parents, took it out on, friends, people. It was pretty obvious too. I probably thought I was hiding it, but it's not healthy. It's not a good thing to obsess over these things. And especially when, I tell kids a lot now, you got to realize, you're a high school kid, you have so many races in your future. It's not worth getting so worked up. I understand that, a high school national championship or a regional meet or state meet is so important. I went through that, and that's the way I looked at it too. But it's not worth, beating yourself up over for so much, because everybody has bad races. And, I tried to make sure that my bad races weren't that far off from my good races. And that's like a mental thing more than anything, because, I guess I feel comfortable saying it now, but there were times where I'd give up, when I was younger, in high school or even in college. I remember I started working with a sports psychologist, I think my sophomore year in college. And, I just had kind of a disappointing race. I got beat at the end, and, he watched it, and, this was the very first conversation I had with him. And, he was kind of asking me what's going on. And so I was telling him a little bit about my background, and then he was asking about that race, and I started, rambling on about whatever. And he cut me off in the middle. He's like, you gave up. You just gave up. And that's the whole reason why, there's no reason you should have finished that far behind, the guy that beat me and all this stuff. And it really kind of shook me for a second, because I wasn't always used to hearing that. But I think that was the best thing that I could have heard at the time. And, and we worked on from there. And a lot of it, it goes back to what I told you. I had some weird thing in my head where if I wasn't winning and dominating, or what I perceived to be dominating, it was a bad race.
Yeah.
And especially you can get away with that attitude, I think, when you're younger, and, I guess the pond is a little bit smaller. But the more you move up, and especially going from high school, you can be one of the best in the country, and you go to college and you're just, you're back down on the lower part of the totem pole, and there's a lot of guys that can beat you and do what you do. You're not that special anymore. It is a little bit of an adjustment. But that was the best thing I could have heard then, and again, a lot of it is just working through this stuff and having a lot of honest conversations, and, and me changing my perspective on a lot of things, because, sometimes the success could be, just finishing. I always looked at it like, if I finished a little bit closer to these guys that were beating me every race, that's a positive result. I can't look at it as you're getting beat. It's you're getting better and you're closing that gap. Exactly. And I had enough confidence in myself that eventually I knew I was going to close that gap, but I kind of looked at it as like all or nothing almost, to some extent, where I either needed to be beating them or it didn't really matter. But it did matter. And I think that, when you don't have that approach of taking those smaller incremental steps, you can get left behind, because then sometimes the gap gets bigger, and then what are you going to do? You're just going to fold even more. So I needed to really change the way that I looked at things, and, and that was a big turning point for me, I would say, with my perspective with that.
Yeah. And that's such a good point, because it's, in something that's so measurable, like running, right? Like, exactly what that gap is. And depending on how big that gap is, it can feel insurmountable. But I'm even thinking of just about things in my own life. It's like, if you start focusing on how far off your end goal is, like it can be defeating. You're like, shit, man, how am I going to get there? Like, there's so many things that can go wrong. Like, even if I get there, they might not want me, but it's like, I love what you said about just, incrementally just closing that gap a little bit. Right. And as long as you're closing it, you're moving in the right direction towards whatever it is you're hoping to achieve.
Absolutely. And you can't just look at the end goal. I mean, it's almost too much sometimes to look at that one thing. I'll jump another, this thing that some of the military guys use that I know is, they talk about eating an elephant one bite at a time. You can look at it like, God, I got to eat this whole thing. Yeah. How do you do it? You do it one bite at a time. You incrementally inch forward. And so it's, hearing it from other people, and I don't know, for whatever reason, it clicked in my head then. That's something that I constantly worked on. And, and running, the East Africans just dominated for so many years, and they're still very dominant. Yeah. But for a long time, there was a big gap between the U.S., our best distance runners, and the East Africans, that it did look insurmountable. And, it was a hard thing, to look at, and just, people that I looked up to were getting killed, by these guys. And it's like, I got to come up and beat them. How are you going to do that? And it's that approach of every single race I raced against those guys, I was trying to get closer and closer and closer to them. And then eventually it got to the point where I was competing with them, I was right there, and then ultimately beating them. And that's the only way you get there. And there have even been times in races, where, I've been hurt, and especially in the marathon. Track is a little bit different, but I remember the Rio Marathon, I'd never been hurting, from a race as bad as I was there. It was real hot and humid. And I remember wanting to drop out. I was in third place, with probably, maybe 4, 5, 6 miles to go. And
what marathon was this?
This is the Olympic marathon in Rio in 2016. I was in third place, and I was legitimately thinking, like, I want to drop out.
Oh my gosh.
Like 4, 5, 6 miles to go.
Right.
And it got to the point where, I was thinking about all this stuff as I was running, and I was like, all right, just make it to the next water stop, get there, and then, we'll take it from there. So I was looking forward to just getting another drink and making it to the next water stop. And then that became too long, where, it got to the point where I was literally counting light posts on the street, like make it to the next light post, make it to the next light post. And, and you work through it. You find these small little goals to get through it. And then you just have to chip away at it like that. And then I started seeing the guy that was in second ahead of me, who was way ahead. He was coming back. And then that started giving me more motivation, to keep pushing. But yeah, I mean, people think that those things don't go through, my head or elite athletes' heads, and it's not the case at all. We have those same thoughts that everybody else does, running a marathon or all those distances.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask you. Well, and I guess, but before I ask you that, so did you continue to work with a sports psychologist? Because now hearing like how you pay attention to everything that you're doing, from nutrition to sleep to weightlifting, right? Has the mental skills been an important component of that too?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, I still work with the same guy. His name's Darren Treasure, cool. who I was working with, and so we'll start it back in college. So it's been good. We got a good relationship, and it's good. I mean, it's obviously evolved over the years, but yeah, I think the mental side is huge, and I truly believe, in all sports, not just in running, but
for sure.
I don't know whether it's going to be like 10, 20, 50 years from now, like the big breakthroughs in human performance are going to come from learning about your mind and how that works. Mm-hmm. I feel like up until this point, everything's been about, getting, bigger, faster, stronger, the physical side of things. But I think the mental part, there's just so much unknown about your brain. And that's the thing that I've kind of started to realize a lot over the last couple of years, and really think about a lot is, how can you maximize, the way you think and the way you approach things? Because, your mind will give up before your body almost every single time. Everybody wants to say, I couldn't run another step. It's like, well, could you have not really run another step? Was your leg going to fall off? Or was that just your mind saying you don't want to do it anymore?
Right.
And, it really comes down to that simple question a lot. And those things still go through my head, but you learn to deal with those thoughts a lot more, and you learn to deal with, in the marathon especially, so much of it is a mental battle that, you just learn to deal with being in a lot of discomfort or pain for a really long time, because that's all it is. So your mind constantly telling you stop.
Yeah. Well, and I want to know that too. And it's interesting because I imagine anyone who has tried to run any sort of long distance, because it's relative for every person. If you're someone who does not run at all, like you still know what it's like probably to hit a mental barrier where you're like, I don't think I can keep going. It's at a much more intense and higher level for you. But I mean, do you still have those kind of mental battles in all of the races that you run? Is it something that only kind of now pops up if it's like extreme circumstances, like in Rio? Like how often are you forced to kind of fight that mental battle?
No, it's a constant battle still. I mean, those things are normal, I think, to go through. And I think anybody that tries to tell you they just think positively the entire time through a marathon, or they don't have that, is lying. I mean, there's no way. Yeah, absolutely. But for me, it's so much of it is about just, trying to stay present and not get too far ahead. I think it's really easy to do, especially in a marathon where you're not usually feeling that great halfway through, or 15, 16 miles in, you're like, I got another 10 miles to go, and I'm gonna have to really start racing in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 miles probably, and picking it up, and I already feel terrible. It's natural, I think, for those things to happen. But for me, I always fall back on all the training that I've done, and I do put myself in that position a lot, in training. I don't think that there's no way to kind of dance around doing the work to really run a good marathon. Like, you have to put yourself in really bad situations to try to replicate. And the more you do that, and the more you can kind of get in your mind, like, I've done all these long runs where I'm finished strong, or, I've just felt terrible because I'm doing a lot of mileage, but you're still able to hit it. You start to just, realize, like, do you have it in you? And you just don't think as much about all that stuff, all that pain and whatever that external things, it just doesn't matter. And, I've really just tried to stay present in every single moment. I was talking to somebody like a year ago, and we were just having a conversation about, like being present, staying in the moment, all this. And at one point we got to start talking about what if you could just be completely involved in like one breath at a time. And it's a really interesting thing because I started thinking about it for a while that night. And it's like, man, if you could just be so involved in that one breath of what you're doing, like break it down to that level, you really can block so much out. And you can get through like so many crazy things, but it really comes down to breaking it down to such a small little portion of time. But like the amount of mental energy and concentration to be able to do that and do that for hours at a time.
Over the course of it, yeah,
it's crazy, but you think, maybe somebody will be able to do it, one of these days, have that maybe that's an end goal. I don't know, but it was just a really interesting thing that I remember thinking about, like, you just stop thinking about everything else. And like that one moment in time, it's like, think of all the thoughts you have that are racing through your head and doing all that. If you could just get that out and just literally think for that split second, I'm totally involved in just taking one breath and going out. But it's a pretty crazy thing, I think.
It is. Yeah. Well, and it's like for anyone who's ever tried to meditate, a lot of different meditative practices, I think in one way or another, try to get you to do that, like focus on your breath. And then when you do that, you realize there's another level of like, oh, you can actually focus on like the air coming in your nose. And then you can focus on like your lungs and you're like, whoa, I do this every day, thousands of times. I've never taken the time to realize that I can actually sense all that stuff. And what you're talking about is like, if you could be present for every single kind of like, component of that breath, what would be possible? Well, and let me ask you this, because you said something and now it's kind of shifting my perspective a little bit. I think a lot of times, maybe this is just my own, experience that I'm bringing to it, but when people think like mental toughness, it's almost like this experience of, you just got to push through it. You just got to kind of survive it. But what I keep hearing from you is like being present in the moment. Can you expand on that a little bit? Like, is it about being just completely present in what you need to do in that moment? Like literally get to that next light post, just keep your body moving with good form, or like, I guess what's really going on?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a big part of it, is just being able to set all that stuff aside that's going through your head, all those negative thoughts, all those things saying like, I can't do this. I can't take another second of this. I got to stop. Those things are natural. I think it's important to realize that. But for me, I always look at like it's like that 1 second where you will either say, I'm going to keep going or I give up. You don't want that moment of regret. It'll eat you up, like going through having that one moment of weakness and just realizing like all emotion, all pain, like it's all temporary. It will end at some point. You know, it's not going to be there forever. It might seem like it's going to be there forever, but that's your mind playing tricks on you when you start thinking that way. Like, I can't take another second of this. It's like having that thought. You've already taken one more second of it. Yeah. And so I think that. I think I should go back and say mental toughness, I think, is definitely something that it's a skill and it can be learned. It's not something that, I used to think when I was younger, it's either something that you have or you don't have. You're born with it, whatever circumstances you have growing up that shaped you, it's out of your control. And I don't agree with that. I think that there are a lot of things that you can learn, and maybe you call them coping mechanisms or whatever, but that you can use to get through it. And, running for me, so much of it is about just sometimes taking a deep breath or finding something to be positive about, like counting light posts, getting to water stations, anything I can concentrate on. If you put your energy into thinking about that, you're not going to be thinking about pain. You can't think of two things at the same time. So, if you choose to start looking, and it could be something so stupid, whether it's just looking at something on the side of the road or thinking like, I'm going to keep my shoulders down. You could say, I'm going to concentrate on how my pinky finger feels. It could be anything, but you need something almost to take your mind off, because you can control your thoughts a lot more, I think, than people realize. And some of it's a skill and it takes a lot of practice, but I truly believe that you can do that. And you choose to think about positive things or look at things that, small goals that you can achieve, hitting another light post, hitting another water station, those things, they do start to build confidence. And sometimes you work through this stuff And then all of a sudden you start picking up. It's like, well, what the hell happened? All it is a change in what's going through your mind. I mean, physically, you should be worse off if you think about it, because you're farther off in a race. So,
right.
What's really changed? It's just what's going on in your head.
Yeah. And you said something else too that I think is really important. It's like, because of the training, because you've put yourself in those like tough, miserable situations in the past, when you encounter that in a race, and now I'm thinking broadly about life, like whenever you encounter some sort of like, trial or tribulation, whatever it is, it's like, if you know that you've gone through a similar experience in the past and you were able to come out the other side, it's like you can kind of like tap into that, like, I don't know, I'm jumbling up the explanation here, but you can like tap into all that past experience, and that you actually have more in the tank, even though your head and your body might be screaming at that moment in time, like, you need to knock the shit off. You know what I mean? So I just think that's such a valuable point that kind of dovetails into what you're saying. Like, it can be learned. Like, yes, it can be taught from experience, but whatever your kind of endeavor or goal is, like, there's an opportunity to like train yourself for those moments so that when you are faced with that adversity, you have something to tap into.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's just about, you doing that thing over and over again, whatever it is, and then drawing on that experience,
Yeah.
I love that guy, David Goggins. I don't know if you've heard of him. I absolutely love him, but he talks about like callousing your mind and all this stuff. And it's so true, and that's all that's what training should be. And, and I love, he said something about like, the only way, you grow is through going through uncomfortable stuff, whatever that is. You don't grow by doing things that you're good at and succeeding all the time. And, it's just about this constant process of going through things that basically suck. That's going to build up your head, but you need to draw on that too, and I think I talked about taking some time to reflect and going through on that. After a lot of workouts, sometimes I'll set certain goals, and they're not complicated. It's like one or two things I'm trying to work on. And then you take 5 minutes afterwards and go over like, hey, I did this well. I didn't do this well. And then you translate it over to a race situation. Like, this is what, and it could be something as simple as like, I felt terrible. I was really struggling, but I made it through this workout. I might not hit the times, but this was like a good mental exercise. I didn't quit. I kept going. And you take some time and you reflect on that, and you learn, like, over time, the more you do this, my psychologist talks about like having just a mental bank account. You make all these deposits all the time into your bank account. When you have good workouts, sometimes they're little, sometimes they're big, but you draw on those in races. That's when you pull from all that stuff you put in there, but you have to have it, and you have to take the time to go through and, reflect on that so that it is ingrained. We never want to have a day in training or in practice where it's just kind of, I did it. Now I'm going on to the next thing. And you don't get anything out of it. Even if it's just one simple, small little thing, you've got to try to get something out of every workout of every day that's going to help you. And those little things, like, they add up tremendously. Doesn't seem like it at the time, but you never know. Sometimes you might go back and think about some little thing that you did in a workout, and that could be the one difference, that gets you through.
Your example of the mental bank account was so much better than what I stumbled through. That's where I was going. For everyone listening, that's where we were trying to get to.
He's a professional. That's not my idea. That's
right. Okay. Yeah. He's making the big bucks. No, but that's, man, I love that. So there's a couple things I want to ask you in the time that we have left. I think maybe what might be most valuable is, you've been an elite athlete for so long, but like we were catching up beforehand, like now you're very much a family man, right? Married, whole flock of kids at home. How do you balance the demands of what you're trying to do at an athletic level with also being like a husband and a father at home?
Well, I married the most incredible woman, so she literally deserves all the credit. She's a saint. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And I've said this before, but I can't stress enough, how she put aside all of her goals and aspirations in life to really get behind me and help me pursue mine. And I don't think that there's a more selfless, like, she is so inspiring to me with the way that she handles everything at home, raising the kids and doing everything to help me basically go after my goals at the expense of her own. So I feel incredibly fortunate, and she really is is the main reason why, it all works. But because I miss a lot of time. I miss a lot of time with my kids, even when I'm at home in Portland, just your training's a full-time job. And,
Yeah.
I would always feel bad where there'd be days, especially when our kids were younger, where, my wife would be up with them and she'd still tell me to go take a nap and sleep because I needed to rest and recover and get ready, for my second workout of the day, even though she's
Oh,
probably
wow.
slept 3 hours at night, and she's still telling me go take a nap during the day. I mean, that's just the kind of woman that she is. And,
Yeah.
so it's hard. I certainly, I feel guilty at sometimes, but, she always tells me, don't feel guilty. This is your job. If you're going to do this, we need to do it. We need to all be all in, and they're behind me 100% on this. And, that means the world to me. And it gives me a lot of strength, when I line up to race, I'm always thinking about them even during the race. But, there's just a tremendous amount of sacrifices that a lot of people have made for me to be able to go after my own selfish goals and be at my best, and I think about all those people when I go race and when I'm training and when things get hard, the sacrifices that they've made. And it's like, well, I couldn't look myself in the mirror if I didn't absolutely give everything I could, whether that's just in training, lifting, anything. I need to apply myself 1,000% to all this stuff, just like they're doing for me. Cause they should never care about something more than I do, especially when it's with me. And, I think that there's a lot of athletes that we've in the past that I've been around where we've had coaches, people around them want things more than they do because they don't want to do these little things. And I've vowed never to let that happen with me. And, but yeah, I don't want to turn that into like a negative thing, because I draw so much strength from my wife and kids and all, the support staff and people that have helped me, get to where I am today.
Yeah. It's amazing, man. And it's, I mean, for anyone listening, it's a huge life change once you get married and then once you have kids. And it's like, I'm always so interested how folks who've had sustained continued success, you know what I mean, try to find balance. And I think there's a couple things you said that, like just let it be your motivation. Like if you're going to, don't stop doing what you're doing, but just understand that there's folks making a sacrifice. But also it's like, man, just use it as inspiration. Like I think about that sometimes. Now I'm trying to do more stuff now, married with kids. And I was doing, like I say this all the time, like I was not lighting the world on fire at 25. Okay. Like I was not getting a bunch of stuff done, but now it's like, I almost feel more motivated because I have a family. It's like, you know what? I owe it to them to kind of try and get the most out of what I'm capable of, regardless of what pursuit that is. So
no, absolutely. And I think too, I should say, like, you make the most of the moments that you have, just because you're gone a lot, it makes you appreciate those times so much more that you are at home, and you make time, you start realizing like, yeah, I don't have to go, I'm not gonna be on my phone all the time. I'm not gonna sit and watch TV all day. Like when I'm at home with them, like 1,000% of my energy is going to be into having the best time with my wife and kids and making sure that, I'm the best husband, best father that I can be. And like you summed it up perfectly. I think just using it as a positive, getting the most out of it, being, I always want to be a great example to my kids, and whatever it is, they choose to do. I hope at least, if nothing else, they can look at me and said, like, I applied myself to the fullest and I gave everything I could to go after, this one goal or this one dream of mine. And I look how hard he worked. And that's how you get anywhere, it's just hard work and pouring all of yourself into whatever task it is. I don't care what, occupation, what your goal is, whatever, you just give all yourself to that one goal. And then when you're at home, you give all yourself to your wife, you give all yourself to your kids, and you maximize the most out of it. That's the only way you can do it.
Yeah, I agree. And it's so much easier said than done, right? Because it's, and we even talked about this at the beginning a little bit, like it's easy if you let it to start bringing some of that negativity from work home with you. Right. And I think you summed it up perfectly. It's like, look, man, give yourself 100% in whatever your pursuit is, but you got to give that at home too. And it's tough, tough, right? Like it's not easy.
No, no, it's incredibly difficult. I mean, like I was talking, I don't know if my wife thinks, like I tell her this sometimes, but it's like she has an infinitely harder job than I do. I mean, being a full-time mom, taking care of the kids, like it never turns off. Anybody that has kids, they'll tell you, they'll tell you the same thing. It's just, it is unbelievable the amount of patience and the amount that she can, still be calm and just this awesome, loving mom to our kids, regardless of all this craziness that's going on. So
yeah.
I got 4 kids. I guess I should say that. We were talking about beforehand, but
he's got 4 kids.
It's busy, yeah.
It's a full house.
It is.
Oh, that's awesome. Shout out to all the moms out there. No, and I think you nailed it, man. That is an incredibly important and tough job. All right. So as we look to wrap this up, I have something that I'm curious to know. So for you, right, there's so many different events that you could train for over the course of a year. Like, how do you pick and choose which races that you're going to do over the course of the year? Like, do you have to make a conscious decision, like, hey, based on my end goal, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z and sacrifice, some of these other ones?
Yeah. I mean, it certainly, you look at the big ones every year and you kind of work backwards from there. For me, even when I was running track and the marathon schedule is kind of similar, there was always really 2 big peaks during the year. You'd peak once in the winter for like indoor track when I was doing that. And now, there's usually spring marathons are all in, kind of the March, April timeframe. And then now you got the fall marathons, the Chicago's, New York's, all that. And kind of late September, October, November. Yeah, Vix. I love Bank of America Chicago Marathon. That's awesome.
That's awesome.
I'll give a shout out to them. But but it's always a 2-peak thing, and even for an Olympic year, normally we have the Olympic trials in February and then the Olympics will be late July, August. So that's really been the schedule that we've always been on, and you pick, the biggest meets, obviously would be the Olympics, for this year, and you work backwards from there. The marathon's a little bit different because it's such a long buildup. Track, you're doing a lot of races as a part of your buildup, and you might run a couple, getting ready for a marathon. I usually will do a half, anywhere from like 4 to 6 weeks out. And sometimes I'll do something before that, but that's really it, getting ready for a marathon. But I've always kind of been pretty flexible with my racing plans. You never really, even when I was running track, sometimes we would set certain targets, big races, but you can never be scared, I think, to just go, strike when the iron's hot. If your workouts are going great and you're feeling good, don't be scared to just go for it, and there's been a lot of times where, I've entered races last second, or there's also been times where, I've gotten sick or something. And I feel fortunate. I've had smart people around me that have told me, don't race. You're going to put yourself in a bigger hole. Obviously, if you got injuries, you got to be smart with those. There's always a temptation to race, but I've always really tried to pride myself on being smart, above all else, just making good, sound decisions, taking a lot of the emotion out of it, of wanting to race or wanting to, go do something just because it's there. And, you can always you got to be flexible, be able to adapt and change, and go after that. So I guess it's not really the greatest answer to your question.
No, it's perfect. I'm just so curious.
Yeah.
Well, and we're gonna drop here in a minute, but just also like the varying distances that you've competed at such a high level is so interesting to me. And maybe we can end on that question. I mean, for you as a runner, what's your favorite race? Because you've done everything from sub 4 minute miles to now your marathon. You know what I mean? Like,
it's tough.
What is it for you personally?
It's tough. I love them all. I wanted to be a miler when I first started running. That was like, I'm going to run the mile. That was always the big event. My coach pretty quickly said, you're not fast enough to run the mile, even in high school. I remember I was pretty it was very blunt. Like, he just said it like that. You literally don't have the speed to be a world-class miler. Oh, wow. So I was like, okay. So he's like, we're going to train you for 5K, 10K. You got plenty of speed for that. So I was like, oh, okay. So I guess that was always the plan, even from when I was in high school, like long term, to do that. But then, I think he kind of realized how I was feeling, and he said, but that doesn't mean you can't run a great mile. We're still going to go after that stuff. It just, as a coach, I have to tell you honestly, like, what I think you can be the most successful at. And that doesn't mean that you can't have a lot of success at a mile. I've run 350, so
Right.
not bad, but it's yeah, I always loved running all those different distances. And I always think, it's that old saying, speed kills, and it's no different in track. I always thought the most, in any event, the guys or girls that have the most success usually have the most speed. And, the milers, the guys, they run incredible 800 meters. The really great milers can run great 400 meters. And it kind of goes all the way up, like I was more of a 10K runner, but I ran some great mile times and some great 5K times. And you have to be able to do that. Some people don't always get those races in, but I guarantee you the top 5K, 10K guys in the world and girls in the world every year, they could run some pretty unbelievable mile times. They just don't always do it. But we always, and I still believe to this day, and I think when you look at the marathon, there's been so much, growth as far as how quickly people have run marathons in the last 10 years. And the real reason I think is that a lot of track guys are going up there. You're moving up. It used to be, you run the marathon, you have no speed, you're uncoordinated, and you can just hold it for a long time. That was kind of the idea behind it.
Yeah.
And now I think people are realizing now to be a great marathoner, you have to have a great track pedigree behind you. You have to be able to run really fast for 10K, 5K. A lot of the guys even ran great miles back when they were on the track. And that speed translates up. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, because if you can run, a 10K in 27 minutes versus 29 minutes, think of how easy the marathon pace is going to feel, running, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. If you run 440 per mile, if you have that speed, it's going to feel so much easier running that when you do move up. And it's easier, I think, to
just the thought of having to try and do that for 2 laps for me, let alone a mile, let alone maintain it. It's just
it's all relative, but yeah, it goes that way in every event in track. The guys that have the most success, usually that bottom end is pretty good. And I guess I'll just say the last thing. Distance runners, the really good ones, all the great ones that I've trained with and competed against, the really good ones, they're great athletes too. I've always hated that, perception that distance runners are uncoordinated. It's true for some, for sure, without a doubt. But the really good ones, they have great mechanics. They can sprint. They're maybe not as muscular or big, so they can't generate that same amount of power as a top Olympic level sprinter. But yeah, they move really well. They're flexible, they're coordinated. And so it's something that, I think that our sport is evolving a lot in that regard, and hopefully continues to evolve where it's not something that's just where you put the slow, uncoordinated kids.
Right. Yeah. Man, so cool. Well, dude, I feel like I could probably ask you questions for another hour, but man, so we're excited. Hopefully the Olympics come back 2021. We'll definitely watch you there. For people who kind of want to follow along with you, where's a good place for them to do that? I feel like you said you're notably absent on social media.
I have zero social media, so I don't even know.
God bless you.
Yeah.
Because you're too busy raising all these kids, man. There's no time for it. It's nonsense.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So is there anywhere people can keep up with you, or do we just got to keep an eye out for Tokyo?
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, Pace Sports Management, I guess they're the guys that manage me, Ricky Sims. So he usually will put updates out for sure.
Awesome.
But yeah, I'll be there in 2021, hopefully in Tokyo on the starting line, representing the USA. Could be more excited about it.
Love it, man. Love it. Well, cool. Well, we'll have to get you back in the future, but dude, really, really appreciate you, man, coming on the show.
Anytime. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.